Jonny Fry is here. Yay for us. Jonny, come on up. The role of NFTs in the future. You have our attention, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to share.
Thanks very much indeed. Hello, and welcome to, it looks like a tube station to me, the NFT with a sort of circle and a line going through. So perhaps it's for our American cousins who have come over in case they get lost. I'd basically like to, that's not very helpful, is it? I'd like to give you a quick sort of rundown of, if you like, NFTs and how we see them being used. But before I do, as you can see, I'm an old fart. I'm nearly 60. And my background is one of running a mutual fund company. It's still a publicly quoted company here in the UK. So I'm coming at this very much on the basis that NFTs, we will not use the word going forward. In the same way, we don't talk about HTML5s, we talk about websites. I don't believe we'll talk about blockchain in the future because, again, being a silly old sod, I remember having conversations with a mate of mine who worked for Colgate about, was Lotus Notes better than Word documents? Who cares? We don't talk about the technology, and I think that's the key thing I'd like to. So we'll go through these various different bits of various points, and if anyone's got any queries, anyone violently disagrees, then please put your hand up. But I hope you'll sort of get some sort of use out of it. So the current use cases, we've got the good old ape. He always has to pop up, doesn't he? But perhaps more interestingly is, for those of you not aware, that's a Leonardo da Vinci. Priceless. And there was an American lady who wanted to buy a Leonardo da Vinci for her husband. He'd always wanted it. So she stumped up $240,000 a couple of years ago in the middle of the pandemic when the Uffizi Gallery in Florence was shut. So that was fairly helpful. That's worth about 5,000 visitors for the Uffizi Gallery. So we're seeing all sorts of different examples. UNICEF have just launched for their 75th anniversary a range of NFTs. So there's just some little examples. The bottom one, unfortunately, the jury's out. They had announced they were going to raise 400 million sterling by launching a series of NFTs based on Premier League football clubs. You know, sort of clubs like Arsenal, Tottenham, and all the normal names that you'd expect. But there's some question over our sort of favourite subject, which is regulatory challenges. Now, this is where I hope most of you will disagree with me, but I would suggest anyone in the UK that's going to launch an NFT, make sure you read what the definition is from the FCA, because that's their definition, and that's why I've put NFT brackets in red. Because some smart-ass lawyer, I believe, could quite easily turn around to the British Museum, the Premier Football League, or anyone else and say, you are promoting a cryptocurrency. You're not on the FCA crypto register. So the reason I say regulatory challenges, it is far from clear at the moment whether you are breaking the law or not. And that's true in many, many countries. So make sure that you've got some decent insurance if you're going to be raising some serious money in this space, which I know is controversial because you've got potentially thousands of people here over the last couple of days been doing NFTs saying, no, it's fine, it's outside the scope of regulation. I think you might find some people will disagree with that. Okay, in terms of sort of potential future use cases, I suppose I should have asked first of all, but believe it or not, property is $326 trillion in value, of which commercial property, offices, factories and the like, only account for 15% of that value. So the homes that you rent and own account for 85% of that 300-odd trillion asset class. The trouble is that it's very difficult for you to effectively go and buy a cup of coffee by selling a brick off your chimney. Anyone that tells you, don't worry, tokenize your house, and we'll create liquidity, they're talking out of their rear end. Because we have something in the States called REITs, which have been around since the late 50s. It's about an $80 billion market. Most of the REITs are trading on a discount to their value. So you launch a £100 million fund, or $100 million fund, it's typically going to be trading and be worth 90 million the next day. Here in the UK, a number of commercial REITs are currently trading at a 35% discount to net asset value. But I still think that we could well see, and we've got a little example of how that might actually help coming forward. Vehicles. Now, for those of you who own a car, and I know it's quite trendy not to own a car, you zip cars and your Ubers and all the Lyfts and all the other bits and pieces. But if you own a car, the concern is in a second-hand car, What's its service history? Is there any finance on it? Has it been involved in an insurance? All these other things, which we tend to only find out by mistake because we've bought a car that we don't understand the provenance, and then you find the car's not worth what you thought it was worth. Well, if the information about that car was actually held on a blockchain, given to you as a digital certificate, and I think that's what we're going to see more coming through, which is what an NFT is, then you could actually very quickly ascertain the provenance of that car. And that's already being used by the likes of Lamborghini, whereby your Lamborghini will be worth considerably less if you haven't got an authorization and proof that the Lamborghini is indeed a Lamborghini with all complete genuine parts. So we're beginning to see this. And I think you'll see a lot more of that. And I think you'll also see, I don't know, who's bought a house in the last 5 years? Can you put your hands up? Right. Okay, I hadn't bought a house for 20 years and bought one 10 years ago now, and the documentation pile was that thick. The previous house I bought, it was about that thick. So imagine you had all the information, especially if you live in a flat. Imagine if you had all the information about your property on a digital certificate that you could then investigate, or the lawyer could do it on your behalf and say, has it got plan permission? Have you got access rights? You know, are all the service contracts up to date in terms of health and safety and fire and all the other bits and pieces? And that's where we're beginning to see more and more interest. And we're working with a couple of the university colleges here in London that have got, one of them's got 300 properties all over London. And they don't know whether all of their buildings are actually compliant. If all of their buildings, once they're onto, have got effectively onto a blockchain and effectively can be automatically investigated and looked at, then we may actually avoid something like we saw with Morgan Grenville. So that's something there with the Grenville Tower, whereby that could have been averted if the correct information was there. A neobank, a sort of a fintech, a startup bank in all senses in Brazil, 45 million customers. Now, I thought that was quite a big number until I saw Crypto.com's results last week. They actually generated, for the second year running, $1 billion worth of revenue, and now have gone from 10 million customers in February 21 to 70 million customers. So we're beginning to see, and the reason I mention obviously Crypto.com is simply because that's a platform whereby you can actually use your NFTs, and it's much, much easier to hold and store, and that's what we need. We need that user experience actually sort of being made more available for all of us. Education. It's dull, it's boring, but allegedly 46% of the information that you guys and girls put on your CVs, you're telling porky pies. It's not true. You haven't got a degree in anthropology. You can't spell anthropology if you're like me, because I'm dyslexic. So the thing is that if you had your CV as an NFT, and that had an automatic expiry, I've given it to Indeed, I've given it to Reed, I've given it to Roberts, some of the major sort of recruitment companies. If you don't find me a job within a week, a month, 6 months, all my information is dissolved. It's not accessible. So you can't turn around and, some of you are a little bit older, I know, Kate, you've probably used this, I'll keep your record on file. Well, that's a whole load of old bull. They're never going to come back to you, are they? But that's what we say. Sometimes I catch myself even say, yeah, good idea, I'll put your record on file. No. You take control back, and I think you'll do that using, if you like, an NFT. And then finally, obviously, medical information. Up to now, any of you living in the UK, your information is on a database. The NHS has one of the biggest medical databases in the world. That's why so much research is done here in the UK, because we've got your information. We've done to the medical system what Google have done to sort of internet browsing, and they're monetizing it. That's going to stop. Now, if I want to be my information be part of a medical trial, then I can actually say, yes, you have access to my records, and then hopefully I'll then get paid for it. So I talked about buying a brick off your chimney. This is a company, Trust Property Exchange, whereby that's exactly what they're doing. So they're effectively taking a property and slicing it, so you will actually have a transfer at the land registry level, so you own 1% of a house. So that means that if you want to, literally on your phone, swap it from one person to another, you'll be able to do that, and then that'll record it back at the land registry. So that's an example of, at the moment, well, they went to the FCA here in the UK and said, we want a regulated property exchange. And they said, no, we don't regulate property. We don't regulate shares, microphones. We don't do that. So they went to the Bank of England and said, this is what we want to do. Because in this country, we have something called equity release, whereby you own some capital in your property, and you can actually say, well, what I want to do is, I'm getting old and I need a new hip. I've got no cash, but I've got maybe 5, 6, 7, 800,000 pounds in my house. Well, I can't eat my house. Doing something like this, you'll be able to effectively sell and use your house as a bank. And the mechanism will be a digital certificate. Some of you might want to call that an NFT, but they're actually calling it a digital certificate, and it'll be on a regulated exchange. The Bank of England have turned around to the FCA and said, yes, we want you to do it because we think 5% of the UK property market could actually list their house. So you could list up to 49% of your house. You'll never be kicked out of it. You don't pay any rent, but you're releasing capital to do whatever you want. So 5% of the property market is about 300 billion sterling, which is quite a lot of money for Granny to be able to unlock out of a property. So in terms of looking forward to the future, we definitely need some clarity. It's beginning to come, but there's still some way to go in order for much bigger institutions to really get on board with this. What it's going to be more and more, though, is, I believe, a utility. And there'll be less speculation. And this is one of the problems we have at the moment. Most people have got involved in NFTs because of those good old monkeys, because they were hoping to make something. Most of you are in this industry, I suggest, because of FOMO or greed, because you're pissed off hanging out with people who say, oh, I bought Bitcoin when it was $10. I made my son sell Bitcoin when it was 90. I've been in the asset management industry for nearly 40 years, so don't take any share tips from me. But my point is the technology behind Bitcoin actually can have the ability to completely change not only business but society. And I think this is what we're going to see. You're going to start seeing information held in a digitized format, which will then be useful as opposed to just trying to make a quick punt. The whole thing about digital certificates, it gives you provenance, it gives you security. Some of you are probably aware, IBM have conducted some studies showing that you get up to 39% more for the same product if you can prove where it came from. There's an example in China. Sorry if anyone's vegetarians, because you probably won't like this, but this is what they do. They slap an IoT device to a chicken's leg. When the chicken has run around a million steps, their time is up. Because they know that chicken actually tastes a lot better and has moved around and is actually much more palatable. It's been so successful, the brand is called Running Chicken. They're now bringing out, I kid you not, they now have brought out swimming duck and flying pigeon. Not very good if you're vegetarian, I appreciate, but nevertheless, a lot of people still do eat meat. But again, a little example of how that digital information is being used, and we don't even realize and know about it. And then finally, I'd just like to lead you about this whole idea of the metaverse. There's a huge amount of money being spent on it. There's people like Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, just to name two, who reckon it could be worth more than the size of the Japanese economy, which is the third biggest economy in the world, by 2030. So they may be completely and utterly wrong, but we are increasingly seeing this concept. And you might have heard, my favorite word at the moment is phygital. Combining the phygital world with the digital world, the physical world with the digital world. And there's many, many examples of that where we're beginning to see this, and it's slowly coming into our lives. So how do you keep up to date with all this information? Because you've been here 2 days and you're bombarded with it. Well, here's my plug. We write a weekly newsletter that looks at how, where, and why blockchain, digital assets like NFTs are being used. It's free. It's completely verified. So we use a whole series of hyperlinks, giving examples what's happening in Korea, what's happening in Japan, what's happening in London, what's happening in Paris, what's happening in New York. And what we're trying to do is get people to understand how the technology is being used, shouldn't be used, who's using it, why they're using it. Because there's so much bullshit out there, and there's so many people just saying the wrong thing. And then what we have is a whole load of clients tend to be asset managers, tend to be insurance companies, accountants, lawyers, people like that. So they tend to be more regulated. So what we say, we have to verify what we're actually talking about. So that's what we do. And if it's of interest to you, then just go to that digitalbytes.substack and you can sign up and you get a free copy. No, there's no catch. You don't pay for it. The people that use the content, they actually pay and subsidize so that you get it free. But hopefully it gives you a flavor of how we see it coming through. Have we got chance for one question? Go on. Anyone got a question for me? Anyone disagree with what I've said? Oh, go on, you put your hand up, or you just having a scratch?
Johnny, I think
You
just
get
for the
time to
sake,
sign.
just for the sake of the next folks. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Thank you so much.